in their languages, and excited for that. All right, well listen, let's dive in. Can I pray, and let's get ready for the word this morning. Heavenly Father, I just pray that you would just bring these words that I'm going to share and anoint them by your Holy Spirit. Let them be your words, not mine, and have your anointing all over them. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, I'm excited to kind of bring a concluding message here this morning. We've been kind of throughout this month sharing a sermon called Thrive, How to Survive and Flourish in an Unsure World, and I believe this is a message for today. If ever there's been a message, it's for us today. It's an unsure world that we're living in, but God has called us like never before to thrive, to be more than just survivors, to go out in our time. And so we've been kind of focusing our attention on the first few chapters of the book of Daniel. We've been kind of focusing on the life of Daniel and kind of been mentioning a couple of his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We probably know them better by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you ever grew up in Sunday school, you learned about these three characters. So this morning we're going to kind of shift our focus as I conclude this series called Thrive, and we're going to focus on the friends of Daniel, and we're going to look at them. These were amazing, amazing young men. Remember, we made the point throughout these series that these young men, they were Hebrew. They were really prisoners of war taken by King Nebuchadnezzar into Babylon, the cruelest ruler, the biggest, baddest empire of their day. And yet, through their amazing faith, their unwillingness to compromise, they gained great favor from God, that they actually thrived in this secular world. And every chapter of Daniel, the tests get bigger and stronger, but yet God uses these individuals in a powerful, powerful way. And so this morning I want you to turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 3. And we're going to turn to this chapter, and I want you to look there. I'm going to preach a message this morning simply called The Heat is On. The Heat is On. And maybe this term throws to you a lot of different memories. For me, it probably refers to my college days as those term papers came closer and closer and closer. And I hate to say that I tended to be a little bit of a procrastinator back in those days, and I had it scheduled down to how many pages of quality work I could do per night to get the quality work into of those term papers. The heat is on. I don't know, maybe for you, maybe it's the Glenn Fry song, The Heat is On. How many of you guys are old enough to remember that song? If you can go back that far, I always kind of think of it like this. If you get a new car or something like this, or maybe you get a new radio and you get Sirius XM, and it always reminds me of what Sirius XM station do you turn to first. It defines your age. Are you a 70s on the 7 person? Are you an 80s on the 80? Are you a 90s on the 9? I'm a 90s on the 9. If you're an 80s on the 8 kind of person, you probably are The Heat is On. Glenn Fry of the Eagles did this popular song for the movie Beverly Hills Cop, and you probably kind of remember this song, and it probably stirs some things back to you. But The Heat is On is when you're under great pressure. It's the deadline. It's that assignment. Maybe you wait for your taxes to the last minute, and you're running down to get your taxes in. Luckily, with digital taxes now, you can just email them in. It's not that hard anymore to get these things done, but it's this pressure. Well, I want to tell you, in this case, in this scenario, it's a lot more physical than it is just the deadline due. We're talking about a literal sense of a fiery furnace. How many of you guys obviously know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace? If you don't, I'll fill you in on the story. It's probably one of the most famous stories in all of the Bible. So let's turn there to Daniel chapter 3. I'm going to kind of read a large portion here today, and then I'm going to kind of fill in the rest of the story as we look through this. So it starts in verse 1. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high, 6 cubits wide, and set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, all of the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all of the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed to the nations of the people of every language, "This is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship immediately will be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as he heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and the people of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, the astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who paid no attention to your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." So here's the story. King Nebuchadnezzar, he builds this massive gold structure, an image of himself. He says, this is what's going to happen. All the people of all of the languages of this place have been captured, many of the nations. When the music of all these instruments start to play, you are to bow down and worship this image. If you don't, there's this big fiery pit we're going to throw you in. And now we probably listen to this story and we kind of say, this is far-fetched for our day and our age. I don't know how I can kind of put myself in terms of this today. I don't see any huge golden images that I'm asked to bow down today. How am I going to relate to this story today? And as I kind of refer to this story, I think this story relates a lot more to us today than I think we could ever imagine. I think it's a lot more like our world today than we could ever think. You see, today, I think there's a lot larger than life images that we're called to bow down and worship to. They might not be a giant statue, but maybe we see them on a giant screen. They're movie stars. We see them in giant stadiums. They're on the playing fields. They're the athletes of today. They're on the ball fields. They're placed in front of us as these gods, as these people that we're called to worship. It was amazing to me as we went through the election period, right? All of these athletes, all these stars that think that they should tell us which way we're supposed to vote one way or the other. And this is this thing that we're showed to another, that just because you make a movie, you should determine how I'm supposed to think in political ways. You know what I'm saying? But this is the culture that's being set up to us. They say you should worship us because of our beauty, our brawn, our wealth, our success. And this is how you should set up, and you should model your life after the way that we set ourselves up. I see a couple other things as we look through our world today. I think we're called to create false image of ourselves to impress others. I think it's called the Nebuchadnezzar syndrome. I think he had a false identity of himself, and he must have had low self-esteem, so he made this false image of himself of gold. And I wonder how many times we have this low self-esteem of ourselves. And so we portray ourselves to the world the way we want to show ourselves. We always show the best of ourselves on social media, right? We want to put our best foot forward. This is what I want to show. We look at itself, we got our selfie stick out, and we say, I want to put my best foot forward. I'm not going to show the worst of myself. I'm going to show the best of myself. And this is the way I want to show how I want the rest of the world to kind of look at how I want to show myself. The world wants us to conform, to be like everybody else. Just like the day of Babylon. If you don't, look at this thing in Daniel chapter 3. Here are these three boys, and they stuck out. like a sore thumb. They just stood out because they did not conform to the way everybody else wanted to be like. And I think it's the same thing as today. We have a world that just says, just conform. Just fit into society. We just want you to look and act and behave like everybody else. And it's the same story that's taking place today. Lastly, in this story of today, just a couple of comparisons. Doing the right thing will always make other people angry. Have you ever thought about this? And I want you to think about the world that we live in today. And I want you to kind of catch some narratives of what's taking place today. Have you noticed in the story that doing the right thing, the honest thing, the thing that's integrity, marginalizes these three young men? And I look at our culture today, and the thing that kind of shocks me today is that we are actually moving into our world of an anti-Christian culture. Have you guys noticed this today? We've moved now from a Judeo-Christian culture where the base values of our culture to now an anti-Christian culture. If you show character or compassion that are Christ-like qualities, you are now going to make people angry around you. And this is what's taking place with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you might be wondering, so if you're telling me if I act right and I act like Christ, other people are not going to like me. Well, think of it like this. If we just acted perfect like everybody else, why would people not love me? Think about Jesus. He acted perfect. He never made a mistake, and they killed him. You with me? And so we're living in this world today that says, we don't want you to act like that. We don't want you to be like that. And we have to remember, at the core value of everything that's going on, this is very important. Don't miss what I'm saying right now. This is a spiritual battle. Are you with me? This is a spiritual battle. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual principalities. So though we look at this world and we see the battle, the turmoil, the things that are going on, the struggles, we have to be able to look beyond flesh and blood. And it's difficult because we look and we think that what we're fighting against is natural, but it's not. It's supernatural. It's beyond what we see just in the natural realm. We have to remember that Satan is real. Are you with me? And the same enemy that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were fighting was Satan. It's the same enemy that we're fighting today. And the same battle that they were fighting in their day and age is the same battle that we are fighting today. Satan's number one goal today is the number one goal that these young men were fighting today. Satan is going to try to get you and I to worship something besides God. You with me? Besides Jesus. And that's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. See, the question for you and I is not, are we going to worship? Right? We've talked about this many times. You and I, we were created to be worshipers. It's in the DNA of who we are. So the question is, not are we going to worship? The question is, what will we worship? We will worship something. What will we worship? And we have to determine in ourselves, we will be worshipers of Jesus. Because we will choose to worship something. And so this decision of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was a question of worship. And Satan's attack on them was, will you worship the God of heaven, or will you worship at that time the worship of earth, which was Nebuchadnezzar? You're going to worship something. Who are you going to worship? And that day, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had the decision to make. Who are you going to worship today? And they said, we will not bow down. We will not worship this false God. We will only worship the God of heaven. You with me? It's the same battle that we will face every day of our life. And so we have to commit ourselves to the Lord, to His commandments. We're not going to bow down to the false idols and the false images that the world wants to place before us. And I want to tell you, gang, it's easy to fall into the traps. You know, they're not these big golden statues anymore. The enemy is sly. He's going to begin to manipulate these little things in our culture. And all of a sudden, we're going to begin to be persuaded away from the things of God. And all of a sudden, our worship has shifted away from those things. This is the reason why at Bethany Church we put our attention and our focus of being a church of worshipers. Because it's important that we understand that we are worshipers of Christ. Amen? You with me? We have to understand this. These three men, they understood the commandments. Exodus 23 through verse 5. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below, and you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the father to the third and fourth generation. Now here's a news flash of what's going on. Why were these young men in Babylon in the first place? Because their forefathers chose to bow down and worship other gods. You got to go back in history to know what's really taking place. Remember, they were in captivity before Babylon in Egypt, right? And God brought them into the promised land and said, now listen, you're going to go into the place that I have promised, but it's very, very important. You are to go in and you are to take every nation. I've given them into your hands, and you are to destroy every false god, every false idol, and you are only to worship me. And what happened is they went in very slowly. And we'll let that God slide. We'll let this nation slide. And all of a sudden, the false gods and the false idols that they allowed to stay in the promised land began to be a part of their culture. They began to worship false gods, false idols, and the punishment of that behavior was captivity once again, not to Egypt, but now to Babylon. You with me? And so they were just simply reaping this passage once again in their life. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had said, no more. We're not going down that path again. We've seen what's happened. We've seen what brought us. We're not going down there again. Okay, let's pick up the story. We're going to jump in here now at verse 13, okay? And this is what happens. It says here, verse 13, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, so he's going to give them a second try here. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, here we go. I'm going to give you guys another shot. You ready? Boys, I really like you guys. This is what King Nebuchadnezzar, I really like you guys. There's a big fiery furnace over there. I'm going to give you one more try. Now, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to kick up the band here again, okay? This is what's going to happen. You're going to hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, all kinds of music. If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? With me? So here's the story. So this is what I want to do. I'm going to kind of walk my way through the rest of this passage here this morning. I want you to take some notes, and I want you to grab a couple things, because there's some incredible points I want you to grab here today. So what do we do in our lives when the heat is on? Because the heat's going to be on in our lives sometimes. How many know this? And this is what I'll tell you. The whole point to this series, thrive. Surviving in an unsure world. Because our world is not going to get more stable. It's going to get more unsure. You with me? But as believers, as the people of God, we are called to thrive and to be more stable. Even though the world's getting shakier, we are called to be more stable. So verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. The first thing is this. Don't worry about defending yourself. You with me? Don't worry about defending yourself. By now, these guys have lived by faith. Now, we've seen it through chapter 1 and chapter 2. They have now saw God come through time and time and time again. They have not compromised, and they're not going to start now. They have a track record of God coming through in their life. No matter what's thrown at them, no matter how hot the fire gets, this is what they say: we're not giving in now. God has taken us this far, and now is not the time to give in. And this is what I want to tell you. Living by faith breeds spiritual confidence. You with me? Living by faith, it breeds spiritual confidence. If you're saying, Pastor John, I'm ready in my life to begin when the heat is on, when that pressure begins, how do I step out in faith? You got to begin to start doing those little things. Because when you start living by faith, it begins to breed spiritual confidence in your life. And these boys said, we're not worried about what's going to happen. We're not frightened by your threats, King Nebuchadnezzar, because we know in whom we believe. Your threats don't bother us. And as a matter of fact, we don't even feel like we need to defend ourselves to you. You are no God. You are simply a man. And their confidence in God is much greater than their confidence in King Nebuchadnezzar. And so they entrust everything in God in their life. And this is what happens in our life. We take for granted the little battles in our life. Do you know that? We take them for granted. And sometimes we just have these little battles in our life, these little things, and we say, hey, if I win them or I lose them, whatever. Okay, well, I won that one, that's good. If I lose that one, that's okay. God will forgive me if I lose that little battle. And what happens is we're missing the big point of what those little battles are about. They're not about so much, you getting things right or wrong. They're about you building your spiritual confidence. You with me? And God is giving you these little tiny tests in your life so that all of a sudden when the tests get bigger and bigger and bigger, you have something to reflect back on and say, okay, God, you were faithful to me during that small thing and that small thing. And then it got a little bigger and you were faithful in that. And then you were faithful in that. And so this is what we have to do as believers. We have to be faithful in the little things. You with me? So that when the big things come, we can be faithful in the big things. You with me? Don't take for granted those small little battles. Don't take for granted those small daily battles in your life.